Thank you for the chance to speak. My name's Annabelle Cleland. I'm the member for Euroa. I am here on behalf of my communities across Longwood, Upton Hill, Ruffy, Crichtons Creek and Gurrum. And my own family property burnt, as did my parents and my sisters during the Longwood bushfire. And what we've lived through is not just a bushfire, it is a systemic failure of leadership and a failure of recovery. I'm going to speak to three areas: failures on the fire ground, the community response and failures in recovery. This fire did not just escalate because of weather, it escalated because the system did not respond the way it should have. We had a catastrophic breakdown in communication. Radio channels were unclear, the communication plan changed during the fire, and that change was not communicated to the people risking their lives on the ground. Volunteers were left to operate blind. There is evidence that even central coordination could not confirm what channel brigades were operating on. This is a system failure that had put lives at risk. We had a complete breakdown in command continuity. Control shifted between locations, personnel rotated in and out on short deployments, and leadership did not have time to understand the fireground before making decisions. Critical leadership roles were vacant, and it took several weeks before the Chief Fire Officer visited the fireground at all. People were placed into positions they were not adequately supported to perform, and one of the most serious failures was the Acting Chief Fire Officer left the fireground at approximately 6 p.m. on Wednesday. This is a fact, and that decision left volunteer group officers to defend an escalating fire without senior command. They felt abandoned because they were abandoned. Those individuals will carry that for the rest of their lives, and you've heard that today. This timeline matters because about 2:30 a.m. on Thursday morning, the fire jumped containment lines. That was the moment this incident escalated. Instead, volunteers were left to manage it. Volunteers, farmers. Without clear communication, without continuity of command, and without senior leadership on the ground, the consequences were immediate. We had about 40 vehicles trapped on the Hume Freeway, including a fuel tanker, surrounded by fire. Volunteers were left to manage the situation, and the fact that more people did not die is nothing short of a miracle. This inquiry must ask, who directed the Acting Chief Fire Officer to leave the fireground? Assistant. It was the assistant. I'll keep speaking. Because of that decision was made within the system, then the system is responsible. And if it was not directed, then we have a failure of competency at the highest level. Either way, it is unacceptable. We also saw dangerous levels of fatigue. Volunteers were working beyond safe limits, 8 days straight in some cases, and no workforce in the world would allow that. And yet we expect it from our volunteers. And we penalise them because many of those exhausted volunteers were also victims. They lost their homes, their fencing, their livelihoods and their livestock because they stayed to defend their properties. They were deemed ineligible for the basic $1,000 emergency relief payment. We built a system that punishes people for doing the right thing, and that is indefensible. What we are seeing is a result of structural decisions that have taken us backwards. After Black Saturday, the Royal Commission called for strong leadership, clear accountability and a system built around operational capability. And this is not what we have today. Emergency Management Victoria was meant to strengthen coordination. Instead, it's become a centralised bureaucracy that lacks operational clarity on the ground. We now have a system where the most senior decision makers are not fire experienced, where accountability is diffused and where decisions made in offices do not reflect the realities on the ground. And this is not what was recommended. This inquiry must ask whether EMV and ERV are conducting a restructure in the middle of a disaster recovery. The government has failed to implement key recommendations from past inquiries. You've heard it numerous times. Fuel reduction is one of them. Communities did their part. They reduced fuel, they prepared their properties. And to hear from the Environment Minister that the targets were not met because they were too expensive is an insult to every family that lost everything. Because the cost of not doing it is what we are living through right now. The CFA is being asked to carry the burden of response, but it is not being given the tools to do so. The CFA cannot employ and manage its own people, and that means it cannot ensure performance, it cannot fill vacancies effectively, and it cannot build leadership capability. At the time of this fire, key command roles were vacant, and it explains why the Acting Chief Fire Officer was even on the fireground in the first place. Volunteers are being locked out of progression and training is inaccessible. Courses are only run during business hours. Now contrast all of that to what the community did, because when the system failed, our community stepped up. Farmers used their own tractors and dozers to cut fire breaks. They protected homes, livestock and lives, and many of them have still not been paid. We had a community-led fodder relief effort distribute more than $2.5 million within 2 weeks. It is faster and more effective than any government programs. Fuel has not been reimbursed in many cases. People who donated have borne the cost. Locals who undertook the traumatic task of euthanasing livestock had to fundraise for their own mental health support. Community organisations like the Strathbogie Disaster Relief Fund have delivered immediate targeted support. They're agile, trusted, and they know their communities. And yet they're not being supported by government. We should be backing these organisations with direct funding because they're proving what works. More than 3 months on, parts of our region still looks like a war zone, and Chair, you've seen the heart of it. This is not recovery, this is a failure of government. The clean-up program has been one of the most inequitable we have seen in a decade. The Deputy Commissioner for Recovery has initiated a 2-tiered system clean-up without eligibility criteria determined and without agreements in place.
Ms. Cleland,
her decision has crippled our recovery. Chair, with respect, you've given everyone else some leniency. I am going to speak on behalf of my community. It has interfered with insurance, and our communities will face contaminated water table if the asbestos properties aren't cleaned before winter. It has divided communities into haves and have-nots. People who did the right thing and insured themselves are being excluded, and that sets a dangerous precedent. Nearly 4 months on, the clean-up has barely started. Black Summer saw the clean-up of more than 600 properties within 6 months, and we have to question the competency of the CEO of Emergency Recovery Victoria. We need a universal clean-up program yesterday. This is not new. Everything you have heard here today has been done before, and it is shameful that it takes an inquiry to remind us that this government of its responsibilities. Recovery is being crippled by planning delays, permits are not being fast-tracked and rebuilds are stalled. Again, this has all been done before. Rate relief is another failure, and there is a clear precedent from Tawong and East Gippsland following previous disasters. Instead, Strathbogie Shire can only offer deferrals due to rate capping, and that is not relief, it is debt. Families who have lost everything are expected to pay rates for years to come. This will financially ruin people. I'd like to table documents that highlight everything I have asked for has been done before as precedent of previous disasters. We are calling for 3 years of rates exemption and not deferral. Housing is also completely inadequate, with the only option being offered is caravans, and we know where that leads. Addiction, family violence and long-term social harm. How, nearly 4 months on, we still have people in tents is shameful. There must be a range of housing options, including modular homes and stamp duty exemptions, and we also need to address the funding inequity. Strathbogie Shire has received $750,000, the same as Mitchell, Mansfield and Murrindindi, despite Strathbogie and Murrindindi bearing the majority of losses. A life has been lost. Hundreds of families have been impacted, and yet the Premier has not visited my region, and nor has the Prime Minister. Instead, my communities have been left to fight for themselves. This disaster risks going down in history as one of the greatest failures of government response this state has ever seen, and that is no exaggeration. But this inquiry has the opportunity to change that, to fix the system and to restore accountability and to ensure that when the next fire comes, communities are supported and not ignored, because they have done their part and it's time for the government to do its job. I'd like to table these documents.
You can send them to the Secretariat and ask to be made a submission. Unfortunately, that was a very passionate contribution. I just think these open mic sessions are designed to give everyday members of the community an opportunity to say.
I am an everyday member. Chair, I also got burnt.
And we appreciate the time you've taken. And now we'd like to give other people time